Okay, guys, let's get started. So, it is my pleasure this morning to introduce the speakers for our last AME seminar series of the year. This is a little bit different format. It's a panel discussion, and the focus of it is what should we do with the fourth year of medical school? Get rid of it altogether, change it around. I mean, what are the options that we have here? Our three speakers this morning, we have Dr. Elnicki, previous course director for CAMC, and now the director of International Medical Education Programs, and still, until what, July 1, the director of CAMC, right? So coming to us from the clerkship director, we have Heather Homan over on the far left, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences, and the newly appointed clerkship director for the OB-GYN clerkship. She's been in her role as official clerkship director for 6 weeks, we decided, and as Robin said, Mike put her to good use and put her on the panel right away. And then finally, Robin, who is known to all of us, who serves as the clerkship director for family medicine. So we are delighted to hear their thoughts. I need to please ask everyone to complete the evaluation, because if we don't get the evaluation completed, we won't get our CME. So vote often and early with this form, and without further ado, we'll turn it over to you guys.
All right. So, as Missy mentioned, this is supposed to be like a panel discussion, not a lecture. So you have to interact. To warm you up, we're going to I'll give some opening comments, and then we're going to take a discipline-based perspective, the family medicine, OB-GYN, and internal medicine perspectives on what we think should happen in the fourth year. And then we'll throw it open, and everybody can just sort of give their 2 cents about it. So in terms of opening comments, so the fourth year was long ignored. Nobody really cared what happened in the fourth year. You did your clerkships, and you're kind of on your own for a year. When I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh Medical School, there were no requirements in the fourth year. It was strongly encouraged that you do a sub-I, but you didn't have to, and I knew people who didn't and matched. And then after that, you could do whatever you wanted. Yeah. And
Mike, that was before the Flexner report.
That's right. That was when our textbooks were in clay tablets, right? Yeah.
As long as you paid.
That's right. Yeah. And the brutal tuition back then was, I think, $6,000 a year or two. So okay, so that's how it was, So, but now in the last, starting about 2012, last 5 years, there's been a lot written about the fourth year. A lot of educators are critical. They question the need, citing rising debt and shortages in physicians. There was a New England Journal article by Abrahamson in 2013 and a JAM article by Emanuel in 2012. And then more recently, there have been a few experimental programs of 3-year curricula. One published by Raymond 2015, Green 2016, that showed outcomes equal to in 3-year programs equal to 4-year programs, but with the caveat that those were highly selected students. It was like everybody got 3 years. It was just a small section of their student body. Then there were calls for reform. The AAMC came out with its 13 EPAs that are known as capers. I always think of those things that you put when you cook salmon, and we'll talk more about those later. And then the Alliance for Clinical Education, or ACE, came out with a position statement by Shalini Reddy, where they gave their recommendations, but those were not discipline specific. They were sort of generic for all fourth-year students. Just to give you a brief taste of it, they recommended capstones, sub-internships, and then tailor to your career plans in sort of a generic sense. changes in the third year are already impacting the fourth year. And to give you an example, just last week, this was perfect timing. There's an internal medicine clerkship director blog, and there was a note from CASE where their clerkship director said that the internal medicine clerkship went from 12 weeks, 8 weeks inpatient and 4 outpatient, to 6 weeks, 4 inpatient, 1 outpatient, and 1 geriatrics. And this change has definitely impacted their sub-I, making it much more critical if you want to go into internal medicine. I mean, you can imagine they've shoved a lot of their curriculum into their sub-I. Students, when they're asked, this is interesting. So educators are very critical of the fourth year. When they survey students, they're very supportive of the fourth year. In spite of they're the ones that are paying the tuition, right? They value it for synthesis, reflection, time to remediate their own perceived holes, continued development, and career choices. There was a really good article by Wolf in Academic Medicine 2014 that sort of summarizes the student's perspective. And then reactions to all this, there have been publications about curriculum reform. In this issue that just came out of Teaching and Learning in Medicine, there's an article by Wackett that gives Stony Brook's overall curriculum reform in the fourth year. In general, there's more structure and less electives. So we did a review and published it in 2015 in Academic Medicine. And we found that 60% of schools now require capstones. And 10 years ago, capstones, by the way, are the intern boot camp. Virtually nobody did 10 years ago. And now 60% of schools do. 90% of schools require sub-Is. And there are a lot of other requirements, ICUs, emergency department, that kind of stuff. And then the other value that everybody, that's sort of the elephant in the middle of the room, is the application process. And there's a really good article in the New England Journal by Eva Agard from Colorado in 2015, where she bemoans the fact that the application process takes more and more of the students' fourth year. The audition rotations, just the interviewing, all that stuff. All right, so that was all I was going to say to sort of whet your appetite, and we'll let Robin give us the family medicine perspective.
Okay, and I'll start off by apologizing. We were triumvirate trying to get ourselves together. We had 3 separate planning processes, and I somehow didn't get the message that we had planned to give you a handout. So I'm happy to send you an electronic copy of all the materials that I'm going to be discussing right now. But you're going to have to focus with your ears, as we say with the small children. At any rate, let me start off by saying that I started sort of my exploration of what's going on in family medicine from, like Mike, a very different perspective. He came up with the clay tablets, and I came up with from an MD PhD program in which I was given 16 weeks of fourth year credit for taking literary criticism courses and writing papers on John Donne and George Herbert. So at any rate, I did do an AI in internal medicine, and I did some sports medicine and some emergency medicine, but that was sort of the extent of the fourth year in that setting. At any rate, so let's talk about this fourth year. Back in 2004, there was a push in family medicine to try and kind of define what it was that was being valued and being advised for in the fourth year, and so there's a publication from them suggesting a fourth year curriculum. They had a sort of a peculiar iterative process of coming up with what they believed the recommendations were from the community, which was developed by RAND. It's called a Delphi study, where they sort of start out and say, okay, what does everybody think? And then, okay, here's what everybody thought. Which ones do you think are important? And then each time they're kind of going back to get more and more consensus on the list. One thing that they did very differently, sort of they separated out program directors' interest in what a student should be doing in fourth year from undergraduate medical education directors. And so there was really 2 separate Delphi processes that they use to come up with these recommendations. And I found these fascinating as an undergraduate medical education director, because we sound hopelessly pompous and not very useful, and the program directors are very, they're to the point. They need simple, basic, important things. So it's an interesting exploration in the different cultures of those two groups. They also, as part of this, they're doing two separate studies really looking at program directors' interest and undergraduate medical education directors. And then for both of those, they approached it both from the question of what rotations would you like to see, and from the perspective of what skills you would like to see. And so I should say, unsurprisingly, for a field that's as broad as family medicine and that brings so many different people in, there's a wide range of things that are considered pretty useful. It's hard, pretty much anything that's related to clinical medicine, it's hard to not find a use for those things in family medicine. They're probably all valuable. The top two things that everyone seemed to agree on: you needed to do a month of inpatient medicine, usually adult medicine. In our medical school, we call something a family medicine AI, but it's basically an adult internal medicine rotation done from in the milieu of the family medicine residency programs. So whether you're doing a family medicine AI or an internal medicine AI, you're seeing adult patients inpatient. So everybody said that mattered. That was the number one request of the residency directors. They wanted you to have acted as an intern in an adult internal medicine setting, and then that was the number two recommendation for the clerkship and pre-doctoral directors. Ambulatory family medicine was the other big thing, and that's an interesting thing because there's so many different ways that gets played out in various medical schools. But the idea of you need to be in the clinic, you need to have the rhythm of being able to see 3-4 patients in an hour, you need to be able to make focus assessments and plans, you need to be able to make good decisions and do appropriate workups from that. Other than that, big stuff is emergency medicine, dermatology, sports medicine, OBGYN, and things like that. So that's from the rotations perspective. The second perspective is really from a skills perspective. And I found this incredibly interesting. Maybe primarily because of the difference in culture between the pre-doc directors and the program directors. The pre-doc directors were saying long things like elicit from patients the meaning of the disease to them and to their families. Whereas the residency director said, number one, the biggest thing they wanted was they wanted people coming in knowing how to do a pelvic exam. They want you to know how to interview. They want you to know how to listen to cardiac murmurs. They want you to know how to approach a joint. So they have very, very concrete kind of recommendations on down that line. They want CPR, ACLS, suturing skills, read a chest x-ray, learn how to handle an undifferentiated problem. If someone comes in with fatigue or dizziness, something like that, get through to what you're working on. So I will, as I said, I will send out a copy of this because it has a sort of a nice rundown in these tables of those recommendations. And then I wanted to just spend a minute and kind of talk from the Pitt perspective. I sent out inquiries to we have 4 different residency directors, program directors within UPMC. We have St. Margaret's, we have Shadyside, we have McKeesport, and most recently Altoona has joined our cadre of family medicine residency. So I reached out to all of those program directors, and then as well we have a director of graduate education, which is Jim Dewar, and he sort of oversees the education perspective from all of those residencies. And they were pretty open. Their big thing, again, they want to see an AI. Ideally from Pitt, they all want to see a family medicine AI. One thing that was very different from sort of the idea of what is good to learn perspective, a lot of the program directors were also approaching this as, what do I look for? What am I interested in accepting? And one major theme was, I want you to look like you're serious about family medicine. I am not interested in matching with people for whom this is a second choice or a runner-up. I want somebody who's got a good attitude about this, who really cares about this, and is committed. And so they want to see family medicine in your fourth year. Not any one particular thing. Ideally, the AI is done in family medicine, and then even in addition to that, some outpatient clinical experience. So I thought that was interesting. And from our rural program director, he liked the idea. He'd like to see, because he's in a rural area, he wanted to see that the students had some idea of what it would be like to be somewhere away from the mothership, is how he said it. He wanted to have some demonstration that you had some knowledge of what you were getting into when signing up for 3 years in a rural community to learn medicine in that perspective. So that was it, and beyond that, it was very much you should learn new things. You should get good at a wide variety of kinds of clinical skills. And then I guess the last thing that I will add is just sort of an update on something that we've been working on. As I reviewed our fourth year offerings and looked at what was available to family medicine students and might be interesting to them, it seemed to me that what I would have wanted as a fourth year, looking at this wide and wonderful array of things that I could learn, I would have wanted to do a progression of lots of different electives, but I'd have liked to have my own outpatient family medicine clinic that I kept coming back to once a week for a half day every week. So I could bring back, I could learn dermatology, bring back those skills. I could learn suturing, bring back those skills. I could learn, sports medicine and OBGYN, all those things, and keep bringing them back to my patients and my clinic. And so that's something that we've been piloting for the last 2 years. We've had 2 very strong students in family medicine that did a pilot of a longitudinal outpatient sub-I in family medicine last year. And we have a number of students that are getting set up for that with this year. So I would put out a plea to anyone out there, if you happen to have one of those students in your rotation, please work with us to try and support that effort, because I think there's a lot of value to it, and it will help them to be even more motivated to learn your skill set by doing that. I better stop talking and move on to Heather.
So thank you for letting me talk about the OBGYN perspective on fourth year of medical school. And it seems like this has been like a long debate as we talked about what to do with the fourth year. So when looking into the OBGYN perspective, I also looked at the literature. We have a position statement. I talked to local experts and then kind of looked at some newer literature. So looking back at the literature, the Association of Professors of Gynecology and Obstetrics, or APGO, along with the Council on Resident Education in Obstetrics and Gynecology, proposed a fourth-year curriculum for students interested in OBGYN. So remember, this is all students who are planning a residency and career in OBGYN. And this recommendation was published in 1993. And basically a task force was formed. They polled 24 faculty and 20 residents to ask what they thought would be the ideal fourth-year curriculum for a student. They gave them 30 choices of courses to choose from, 1-month courses, and allowed them to write in 3 additional courses. These were university-based residencies in the southern, the central, and northern U.S. And then lastly, they spoke to departmental chairs and asked them what they would recommend for students. In the end, a task force was put together, and they used all the information from the polls and came up with their final recommendations. And overall, electives in high-risk obstetrics, ICU rotations, and general medicine received the highest recommendations from those who were polled. And the final task force took all the information and they divided it up into 2 ways. One was courses that should be part of core curriculum, and the other were a list of courses that were for strong recommendation to students. So courses that were considered core curriculum included general medicine, an ICU rotation, it could be medical or surgical ICU, neonatology, and emergency medicine. Additional courses recommended for strong consideration were ambulatory OBGYN or an acting internship in OBGYN, cardiology, endocrinology, radiology, infectious disease, urology or nephrology, and general surgery. So those were kind of the final recommendations. And as we said, these were published in 1993, so they are a bit old. And I think despite sometimes being considered in the realm of primary care, we continue to be a specialty that's very procedurally focused, especially during residency. And additionally, OB/GYN surgery has changed a lot in the last 30 years. Much of our surgery these days is done laparoscopically. So now residents are expected to master not only vaginal surgery, abdominal surgery, as well as laparoscopic surgery, all now working within work hour restrictions that we all face. And since we only have 4 years of residency to get people kind of competent to practice independently, kind of going back, there's been a debate in OB/GYN for years and years about extending the residency to 5 years, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But still, we still only have 4 years. We've kind of grown to expect our interns coming in to be able to come into residency already competent in basic clinical skills important to our field. So these skills include the pelvic exam, like Robin mentioned, as well as basic surgical principles like the use of universal precautions, aseptic technique, and ideally basic knot tying skills as well as basic suturing. And so kind of talking to local experts, it's recommended that students plan their 4th year of medical school to not only get some core courses we'll talk about, but also take courses that will help them gain these skills. So again, after kind of looking at these APGO recommendations, they're a bit old, but still a bit relevant. I wanted to talk to some of our local experts, our educational experts. And many of the recommendations from our educational experts were the same as APGO. And courses for core curriculum included a medicine or surgical acting internship. And with the idea that the student should choose the acting internship that gives them the most responsibility. Which internship are they going to be able to do the most and be the most responsible for patients? But then unlike APGO-CREA, doing an acting internship in OB/GYN is key. It's not a strong consideration, it is key. You need to do an acting internship in OB/GYN. And locally here at Pitt, that usually means an acting internship in urogynecology or GYN oncology or an OB acting internship. And then additional courses for consideration include courses where students have the ability to take care of critically ill patients. And this usually means an ICU or CCM elective, but also could mean an emergency medicine elective, depending on the school and what's available. Surgical anatomy is also a course for strong consideration, reproductive infectious disease, and either an ambulatory OB/GYN rotation or a women's health rotation. So basically a rotation where they're going to get very comfortable doing a pelvic exam. And it can either be through the internal medicine department or through the OB/GYN department. But basically what it came down to is that students, when they're choosing their 4th year, should really be able to justify every single course that they choose and justify why they're doing it. And with the suggestion that the second half of 4th year, so the time when they've already matched, it's not necessarily going to be on their record, choosing courses that helps them kind of brush up on skills or topics they may feel weak in. So maybe that's the time if you had a hard time with cardiology, to go back and do a cardiology course. If this is a time where you didn't feel like you had enough exposure to obstetrics, go back and do an obstetrics rotation before starting residency. Take that time to kind of build up your skills. And like just our field in general, our residency and how we evaluate our residents has changed a lot. And about 2 years ago, we adopted the ACGM milestones. And the goal of the OB/GYN milestones was to develop a project that uses a set of demonstratable, competency-based, progressively developmental outcomes to assess each OB/GYN resident. I have a couple copies of them. They're like thick, so I only made about 5 because it's a lot of paper. A couple copies of our milestones in the back if you wanted to take a look at them. But basically, we're expecting our residents to come in competent at milestone 1. Milestone 1 is what is expected for an incoming intern. And in order to kind of prepare for this, there has been these increased emphasis, like we talked about, in these like 4th year medical school like skills workshops or like boot camps, and that has been something we're seeing a lot more of. And looking through it, looks like the general surgery literature has shown us that these basic skills courses give fourth-year medical students increase in not only their surgical skills, but their competency when entering their internship. And additionally, simulation technology has become very common and can also translate into better procedural proficiency. We also know that we're seeing more of this in the OBGYN literature as well. And kind of looking through, there are multiple studies, abstracts that I was able to find that showed like 4-week electives during the fourth year of medical school, focusing on knowledge and procedural skills can be helpful for students. One example was a study published through the University of Michigan, and they did a pilot project. It was published in 2014, so like a newer study, and it showed this 4-week elective. It was a 78-hour curriculum. It utilized like traditional didactic lectures, flipped classroom activities, simulating paging curriculum, which I thought was really interesting, as well as simulation training and cadaver anatomical dissections, as well as cadaver procedures. And they found that the students who completed this did have better knowledge, more confidence, and comfort answering pages about commonly asked medical questions, as well for an improvement in times in both open and laparoscopic skills. And as I said, if you kind of look through, there are like multiple abstracts, it seems like roundtable discussions and studies that have been published demonstrating this. So these like boot camps or surgical skills courses seem to be becoming like a key for people, especially going into procedural and like surgical fields. But one other thing that I thought might be important for fourth year students was the idea of taking a course during medical school that may focus on leadership. So I thought fourth year of medical school could be like a great time to start introducing this concept of leadership, and it could be very helpful in helping students transition from the role of a medical student to a resident physician. And also I felt could be really good for helping them navigate through the hospital and like clinic settings. And so although in the literature much attention is focused on skills acquisition, I think the idea of maybe like a mini leadership course, especially to focus on teamwork and leadership skills, could be really important for students if something like that was available. So in the end, kind of like looking at our literature, the APCO guidelines, which are old, talking to like expert opinion, I think key courses for fourth year students would be an acting internship in medicine or surgery, definitely an acting internship in OBGYN. Talking to our residency director, these kind of away acting internships may not necessarily be important in OBGYN. These audition rotations, not always as important as actually just doing a really great job at your own institution. Critical care medicine, especially critical care medicine rotation where you do a lot of simulation training, can be very important. Surgical anatomy, an ambulatory OBGYN, or an elective in women's health, again, where you get the skills of doing the pelvic exam. And then things like Repro ID if it's available. And then if you have a surgical skills or boot camp, that would be a great idea. And if you have a leadership course, that would be a great idea, I think, as well for students.
All right. So the internal medicine perspective, right? So in 2013, the Alliance of Academic Internal Medicine, so that's the club that has all the chairman of medicine, fellowship directors, program directors, and clerkship directors in internal medicine, realized that we didn't have a position statement on what you should have going into an internal medicine internship. So what they did was they tasked a committee with using the membership of the program directors and the clerkship directors to get together and try to come up with some sort of statement. And you see how these guys kind of just sat down and hashed it out. Well, being interns, we couldn't do it in an easy way like that. So the first thing we had to do, we had to come up with a name for the committee. And the meeting was the meeting was in Tucson. And so I was sitting there, and we're arguing about this. I looked outside, and there was one of those big saguaros out there, and I sat down and I wrote the CDIM ACTM Committee on Transitioning to Internship, cacti. Everybody goes, that's it? That was it? That was the only time I've ever come up with one of those names, like the cardiologist always did. So anyway, so that was the name. And then so we decided that rather than just sort of autocratically come up with a list of stuff, that we would survey the stakeholders, and we would look to see what was going on already in medical schools. And we divided into two working groups. One was the summer internship group, and that was led by Bob Vu. And then I got the rest of the year from my working group. And Bob's group came up with a really good paper, and it's in the references I gave you guys, about really what should go on in the internal medicine sub-internship, because everybody pretty much agreed that you should do a sub-internship in medicine. So then the next thing we did in our group, we looked at the websites of all U.S. medical schools for their course offerings and what was required and what was recommended. And we surveyed program directors. That was published by Steve Angus. And clerkship directors. That was published by Kathy Kratian. And then residents using the in-training exam. And that was published by Ann Pereira. And all those references are in the back. And it was really neat because everybody kind of said the same thing, what they want an internal medicine intern to be able to do on day one. And the gist of it was they wanted them to be able to recognize who was really sick, when to call for help, how to write orders, how to look stuff up, and how to do handoffs. And those were the 5 big things. And when they asked them where you wanted the students to learn this, nobody really cared, and they really agreed that you could learn it in multiple places, right? You can learn to do handoffs in the ICU, in the ER, or under sub-I. So that the where you did it wasn't the most important thing. So what we decided to do was base our recommendations on the AAMC's core and trustable professional activities for entering residency. Those are the EPAs for the 4th year, known as CAPERS. I love that name. And what we then decided was, and that's in the handout, by the way. So there are 13 of them, we decided that some of these, 8 of them to be exact, should be done during the internal medicine clerkship. So you should have these under your belt before you arrive in the 4th year. And you can see all this stuff, and it makes sense, like being able to do a history and physical, come up with a differential diagnosis, recommend common diagnostic and screening tests. So those would be sort of, on Pangaro's system, sort of reporter, interpreter level kind of things you should be able to do. And the 4th year should be more the management level skills. So the ones that we thought were important to develop during the 4th year were to enter and discuss orders and prescriptions, form clinical questions, and retrieve evidence to advance patient care, give or receive patient handover to transition care responsibility, collaborate as a member of an interprofessional team, and recognize a patient requiring urgent or emergent care, and initiate evaluation and management. So you see how those just really line up with what all our stakeholders said and what the AAMC says is important, right? And then in the paper, the final draft of which is sitting on my desk. After we get done with this, I got to finish it up and send it in. Because what's going to happen is it's going to be reviewed by the Alliance's council and board, and then they'll stamp it for approval, and we'll send it. And that'll become internal medicine's document recommendations. And again, I can tell you, it's not going to recommend, other than everybody agrees you should do a sub-I. You should get these skills, and where you get these skills is sort of up to the school, and everybody recognizes different schools have different things. Some schools have these boot camps, some don't. Some have very strong ICU rotations, some have very strong emergency department rotations, and you probably shouldn't do all of those. You should just sort of pick and choose where you want to get these skills. But you can see how you could get those skills at a bunch of different places. We didn't really go after specific procedural skills. Everybody kind of thought that was more for something during residency, but more how to approach a patient, how to prioritize, that sort of thing. So just a bit. So that's it, and that's going to be the tack we're going to take. So that was the prepared part of it. Now this is, like I always tell the medical students, this is when you have to interact with us, right? So do you guys have thoughts, questions, and any discipline is fair game. You're not limited to these three. Yeah, Gene.
Well, it seems to me that the opinion of the committee is that we should have a fourth year.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the discussion point.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Everybody recognizes. So in medicine, we've had these shortened programs way back. Like when I was at WVU in the 90s, we had a 3-year program that was only for a few students, very highly selective. And people agree that there's room for that type of a program, but only for very select students. You can't just let everybody do it, Yeah, so you're right. Everybody. How about you guys?
Yeah, there's certainly a move on it in a few different places in the country right now for an accelerated program like that in family medicine. The theory being some number of the medical schools that have specific missions to provide primary care doctors for their area. The dean, I still remember the guy, he was, I think, trained in internal medicine, but he said, I've got to produce primary care doctors. I know if I send them to family medicine residencies, 90% of them will be primary care doctors. If I send them to internal medicine residencies, 20% will be primary care doctors. I need to beef up this part of our education system. And so he set up a system where it's a 3-year program. It's very, very exclusive. You have to be at the top of your class when you're accepted. If you ever hit under the 50th percentile on any exam all the way through the medical school, you're not in the program anymore. You have an automatic spot in a designated family medicine residency program of their choosing from the beginning. They actually did a bunch of fundraising to cover the tuition for the second year. And so when they do the calculation for how much debt the students are in, generally those who did the 4-year and then started residency, they were in about $128,000 of debt when they did this calculation. And when they did this accelerated program, they were more like in $25,000 worth of debt. So it was a huge difference in the debt load because they were making money in the 4th year because their tuition was covered in the 2nd year. And so they were able to really get through fast, but it had to be very, very strong students. They never got a day off. They started before the beginning, before August of their 1st year. They went through every summer. They had, big clerkships that were starting very, very early. And then they eliminated all of the time spent in interviewing, all of the time spent in doing general electives and such, and just got them all the basic things that they really needed and got on. Again, it's considered a very successful program, but it's a small thing and really not aimed to be something that's for everyone.
But how are they? So I can, as we're sitting here thinking, I can think of all these different places where we fast track people. You can think of World War II where they fast track doctors through. You can think of the Jeff program at Northwestern where they fast track with 6 years. You can think about a lot of the international programs where they do 6 years and you go out and you're a doctor. You can think about fast track for our clinical scientists and our basic science research. And so my question would be, with all that experience and with the thing that you're mentioning, has anyone looked at outcomes? Are these doctors as good as, now you've got some selection bias.
Yeah, there have been a couple. So, if you buy the idea of milestones, right, instead of time, it does take everybody the same time to hatch, that some people will be ready sooner, some people will take longer, So that's been kind of the gist of these programs, though, that they take a handful of students. The program that I know the most was West Virginia's program, and it was similar to what Robin was talking about. Your 4th year was sort of half 4th year, half internship. The real carrot was no tuition and you got paid half an intern's salary. You also didn't have to worry about the expense and time of interviewing and matching and all that stuff. You just automatically matched in. They tended to attract older, more mature students, like a lot of couples.
Yeah.
Who can, so we know what we're going to do. We're going to go set up a clinic in New River Gorge, and we already know what we're going to do. We haven't picked out, we don't need all this, And it was very structured. Each one of their months was sort of picked. There was very little elective time. It was very successful. Those students did well. Any of them measured, any objective measure you wanted to do, they did as well. But again, only a few.
High achieving and same thing. It tends to be mature students, which you guys know what it's like to have an immature student in the clinic. You just can't.
Did you guys talk about it at all?
Yeah, I don't think we really talked about that in the OBGYN world, and I don't know of any type of program like that from OBGYN's perspective, but it does seem like the fourth year is still necessary. I mean, one, OBGYN often students don't get the same exposure. I mean, most OBGYN rotations are about 6 weeks, our students have 4 weeks, and I do think you need more time during that fourth year, one, to just make sure you get the exposure more than like 6 days on a subblock, and so I think it's important for our students who may not be 100% sure on what they want to do. So I mean, these very select programs are obviously for students who have come into medical school knowing what they want to do, have their eye on the prize, and know how to get there. But a lot of our students come in and they may be torn between OBGYN neurology, OBGYN peds sometimes, not knowing where they want to be. So you really need that beginning of fourth year to be able to explore that more, especially when students don't have as much exposure to one type of field. I do think the fourth year needs to be more structured. I mean, I kind of joke, I look back at the second half of fourth year, and it's like the most relaxed I think I'd ever been, because traditionally it wasn't structured. I mean, you matched, and then people weren't doing much at that point, much learning, and it is a really good time to do the learning. OBGYN also, I think we struggle just even training our residents to really get up to speed in 4 years, just as we talked about, all the changes in surgical technique. We're now required to master more types of surgeries and not master, but at least be competent to perform independently more types of surgeries. And even in the OBGYN world, we're kind of having that debate of people, some people are going to go off and just be obstetricians, some people are going to be just gynecologists, some people are going to be the gynecologists who operate, some people are going to be ambulatory gynecologists, and our field is even just being divided up because it's really hard to get through just in 4 years and really become very competent at all areas.
Yeah, because I think there's a big internal medicine, really, the fifth year or fourth year for internal medicine training.
That's not going to happen now.
The debate about the fifth year, going back to the article from 1993, that was my life. In 1993, they were trying to get a fifth year of residency for OBGYN, and it's been a long time. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're just becoming, in the end, a little bit more subspecialized. We see that especially in our department. People who are minimally invasive surgeons, people who are just, ambulatory gynecologists, people who just do obstetrics, and I think our field is kind of going in that way. So.
Hey, Dr. Roth?
Well, I have one question. Are we satisfied with the third year? In other words, you can look at this time in various ways, and the lengths of the rotations, or giving students, shall we say, elective choices as to how long they want a rotation to be, especially if they weren't sure what they wanted to do. In other words, I was trying to strain back in my mind, what did I do in the fourth year? But one thing I recall was, I don't think my fourth year really began almost till December or January. There were things that I was still doing related to the third year. So I think we should feel very secure in the third year about what people are getting, and are they really getting it, and does it really help them to make good choices, as you're pointing out, because that's a big thing, to make a good choice. And somehow, I think there should be potential, if we're happy or unhappy about that.
Yeah, we use the term.
And then I have one just second thought.
Okay.
I think there has to be some clear elective time in the fourth year, when somebody can like slow down a little bit and feel a little more something, because internship is going to be different, and they've just finished 3.5 years of a rather intensive medical school experience. So I just feel from the chronobiology perspective that there should be some time that is less pressure.
So we use the terms third year and fourth year like they're calendar years, but everybody recognizes that they're
Right.
not. You know, that
Right.
a lot of schools now, you know, ours included, end the second year early, so the third year starts, you know, in spring and
Right.
it's a long year. But everybody still is comfortable with the, you know, the clerkship year being called the third year, you know. And a lot of our students are still doing required clerkships well into their fourth year.
Right.
You know. It's funny when you look at these studies that surveyed the students, they all say just what you say. They really value that time to sort of take a deep breath, relax, go do some stuff that they're not going to do again. You know, and they reckon, I can remember I did a month on the Indian reservation in Arizona with the Navajos, and I really enjoyed that. Thought I got a lot. I did a month of ENT. You know, because I knew I wasn't going to do that again. You know,
Rotation.
yeah, and you want to do stuff like that. You know, and I think everybody appreciates that. You know,
But I think the open question still is, how long should that period be?
Yeah.
And presumptively, the people who are the critics of the fourth year are, in a way, saying, well, it should be a whole year where they just have discretion to do X, Y, Z.
Everybody says, yeah, the students should have elective time, except I want to insert my thing, right? You know, and so that elective time is, if you just look at the trends nationally, it's shrinking. You know, and at what point is it not enough? You know, I think that's a good question. Tom had a.
I was just a comment about the idea of fast tracking, which is there's a fair number of medical students, and for that matter, a fair number of interns who know exactly what they want to do and end up not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think eliminating that option has some treachery associated with it. I have some, to go back to my original, what I really wanted to say was, I have a little more radical suggestions about what to do with the fourth year other than abolish it, which is one of my suggestions.
I'm not surprised.
I think Lauren's point is good, which is, you know, where is it written that the core clerkships have to end by a certain date? The one way to get people to have the different exposures we're saying is that every rotation should be 20% longer, or some rotation should be 20% longer. An alternative to that, and this is the more radical suggestion, would be to turn at least part of the part of the fourth year into what is essentially a rotating internship. So that everybody would do a medicine acting internship, and a surgical acting internship, and an OB acting internship, and a family medicine acting internship. And so they would get the different exposures, they would learn more, they'd have more responsibility, and there still would be some time for elective things, but there would be some perhaps. But I think there's more radical ways to accomplish what we're talking about doing that might be effective. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of room for negotiation, but
Sarah had a.
I just wonder, thinking kind of along those lines, you know, when I reflect on what I did during fourth year was a lot of nothing in the early spring and then panic when you start heading into internship. And I think Sue Dunmeyer had that kind of, that course, I don't know if it still exists in here, but like it was like a week or a few weeks where you could make prep. And all of those skills that were taught in that course were applicable to everyone, right? How to manage and decompensating patients, what kind of common phone calls come on night float, and how do you manage those? The things that I wonder if the latter part of the fourth year might benefit from a more structured focus on those skills that all doctors need. Some of those may be skills-based, how to be part of an interprofessional team, how to answer your page, how to triage things, how to manage a decompensating patient. The other thing I wonder if it might be helpful is, again, with that mind of kind of going back and letting fourth year end be kind of a relaxation, congratulatory, you're done, but also keeping in mind those things that made you go into medicine in the first place. Thinking about adding things like leadership, as you mentioned, like health policy, kind of like you start medical school, how to be a doctor, intro to being a physician. Maybe we should end medical school with how to be a leader in your community in a variety of ways. It seems like something that might be.
I agree. I think that would be really helpful. I think, leadership often even if you most of the time these are courses and skills that are being taught to people who already are at the attending level. Certainly sometimes some residencies are incorporated, but I think it would be just incredibly helpful with people, as I said, into the transition. Even though interns don't feel like leaders, they are in fact leaders, and as they go through residency each year need to assume more of a leadership role, and I think just having that early would be very helpful and maybe help with some of the struggles.
And I'll put a footnote to that, is that they're not prepared to run a service as a leader and a teacher. Yeah, because many, many times they come in and they may be able to lead the service, but they don't know how to teach at level and to run a service as a teaching service.
Yeah, no, that's
Maybe functioning well in a hierarchy and learning to be a leader and learning to be a follower also.
yeah.
We've been running a boot camp in surgery for the past 3 years as a pilot institution for an initiative that was developed by the American Board of Surgery together with the American College of Surgeons and the Association of Program Directors in Surgery because of a response to growing concerns that graduating medical students were inadequately prepared and lacked confidence in the transition to internship. This course now has gone through some evolution, but many institutions now have responded to this initiative, and a position statement was published about 2 years ago in JAMA Surgery stating that all institutions should be developing these courses. Our course combines the perioperative care with surgical skills, instrumentation, simulation work, team training. And then we have a very nice mock page program that Heather mentioned that we have been utilizing the Valfilmer and the State Patient program really has done an outstanding job. And the students receive calls on their cell phones with clinical scenarios that they have to talk through. And the SPs are very skilled at providing very objective evaluations. And then there's a debriefing session every week for the students with the faculty member on those cases. We also have some sessions about managing conflict and telling a patient the bad news, how to teach, work-life balance, how to prepare for a surgical case. And we really felt that the students have had a very positive experience, and it's really helped them feel more comfortable making that transition.
You guys have
Yeah, how many students go through that every year?
It's been increasing, but I think the last we had was about 15.
I just heard, I actually just learned about that from KMS, and I thought that was really exciting, because from the OB/GYN perspective, we maybe get 5 people a year going into OB/GYN, but that seems like, even if you're not going to general surgery, anyone who's going to a surgical field, that pitch should be going through that course.
OB
Yeah.
graduating students.
So Bob and Jason each.
It feels like a little bit of this is what, in high school they have courses about how to be a college student. That is because you come to college and there's all this stuff and you feel like all there's drugs and stuff. I would not drop out. That's like, or if you're a medical student, how do you be an intern? That's a really different goal of the 4th year than how do I think about the 4th year that will help me have a better career, like when I'm a 4th year senior in high school or college. I take courses not because they're going to help me in my first year out of college. Those are the things that Mike, you were talking about, things that I took that was like, oh my God, I would never have taken this, and it's helped me over my career, think more broadly, or have skills. And there's a certain sense that we need to be clear which is the goal of the 4th year. Because if the goal is to help them be a better intern, you would do one thing. If the goal is to help them 10 years down the road, you might have to force your folks on, you know.
Let's just let Jason give us his comment.
I actually just want to ask about a different thing that has been proposed as a fourth-year focus, and that's the reintegration of basic science material. Nobody commented on that, but I know a lot of medical schools are thinking, is this a time to talk about personalized medicine and omics? And what are your thoughts?
That's to reward Cynthia for coming, right? We have to. So that's a lot more common than I thought. When we did the review, I forget the exact percentage, but it was close to I think over a third, between a third and a half of schools have something like that. A lot of times they'll wrap it into like an EBM course or a research fundamentals kind of course, but that's actually pretty common. And it gives you, because you get a different perspective on the basic sciences, having been exposed to some clinical stuff, and that was sort of the takeaway. But I was surprised how common that was as we went through.
I was not seeing pushes in that direction, but that said, I have very much seen residencies moving in the direction of trying to bring those things as practically as possible into the clinic. And I think there's a deep interest from the family medicine community in, okay, how does this turn into something that I can do something with my patient in a real, so they're less interested in the theory, but they're very interested in kind of the practical, what does this mean for my patient?
I mean, I would also love to hear from another surgical approach. I think the idea of incorporating evidence-based medicine would be great to bring back to the fourth year. Whether we need to always incorporate other aspects, it's unclear. I think we get more focused on procedural things and having someone being prepared to know how to scrub into the OR and do basic procedural skills. So in my mind, I like that focus. But I'd love to hear from another surgical perspective as well. I'd hate to be there.
Well, I want to make a comment. I mean, there's a lot of things necessary really to be a successful physician. And they're going to vary from student to student, what they need. But maybe we need a little more of a conceptual approach to the fourth year into categories that we would like to think have real significance. So, for example, if the issue is skills, you could say, well, every person who has elected to become an intern resident, in surgery, in internal medicine, in psychiatry, whatever it is, there ought to be some time spent on the essential skills for that particular form of medicine so that people feel a little more confident that they can walk in there and take all that responsibility day one, okay? But I don't know how long that is. It might be a month of skills. It might be 2 months of skills. But there ought to be somewhere in the fourth year where you do kind of prepare yourself to be what you're going to be, not the whole year, okay? Now, Dr. Levine has commanded, I just want to say this because I want to be realistic, and it is going to occur, and I have part of the responsibility to make it occur, that there will be some basic science in the fourth year. And with John Mahoney and with Ann Thompson, we're looking at a way to try to put that into a meaningful case format. In other words, where do you start with a scientific advance, move it to translational medicine, move it to clinical medicine, actually get it done so the patient gets it? Okay? So we're working on that, and that's going to be there somewhere, and I just don't know how long, but it is something that our team is very
One last Cynthia.
Just from a basic scientist point of view, how people have approached related things, and working a little bit with John on the basic science and this particular course. A lot of schools are dealing with a couple of questions. One is also whether to actually have any research that the students do be largely located in the fourth year, not running through all years, or not predominantly, let's say, in the first and second year, with kind of this break in the third year that we sort of do now, and then a quick finish up. A lot of schools actually have, not a lot, but many are considering having the research come version after the match, the cohort actually come. And then the other question that arises is whether these return to basic science principles should be something that is the same thing for all students, or should be focused on the area that they're going to go into.
One last one, then we're gonna have to stop.
I guess I'd love to be the last person. I would actually maybe be as radical as Tom and as practical as Bob, which sounds crazy to say. I would say that we have a lot of roles as medical educators. One of them is to train people to be doctors and insurance so they don't kill people on their first night on call. And one of them is to make them great doctors 50 years from now. One of them is to know basic science. We are different from PAs and MPs who have a different background. And I guess my question would be, or my comment would be, instead of thinking about how the fourth year does this, we should probably think how we do this in med school. And we still in our school and most schools have this arbitrary concept of basic science for a year and a change, and then clinical stuff as basic science for another little bit, and then clinical medicine. And maybe the other thought is to say, what are our 3 or 4 major goals of medical school, and make sure that they start on day 1 and end on day whatever the end of medical school is, fourth year, and really longitudinally. The scholarly project is actually kind of good because they do it ideally longitudinally. I know a lot of our students can.
I think that's the whole idea of the EPA concept, right? And that's what the AAMC's come out and say pretty much what you just said.
Yeah, if you do this surgical boot camp, your first week of medical school to learn something about surgery, and then you did another one at the end of your first year. That's what you were going to do, and you're really learning those skills constantly, and learn clinical medicine constantly. That would be very different. I think we'd have a very different discussion.
All right.
I would love to see, like Robin's suggestion of your half a day clinic longitudinally. Could you do that all 4 years? Yeah.
Some places do.
Many places, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, we gotta stop.